here today with Tony Richards, who is the owner and founder of Hippie Radio, 94.5 FM here in Nashville. I think the fastest growing radio station in this market. Is that right?
That sounds good to me.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about radio. Can you tell us a little bit, just to start off, about how you got into radio in the first place?
Yes, I was 13 years old, and a friend of mine and I ran into another kid whose father worked at Magnavox, and he had a little radio station. And I was like, "You have a radio station? What?" And I went over to his house, and they were broadcasting out of their bedroom. It only got out maybe a mile or so. It probably wasn't really illegal or a pirate station, but we called it that. But it was about the coolest thing I ever saw. So I'm like, okay, for me, it was all about being on the air and trying to get girls with it. And when you're 13, that's what you do. But it could have gone the other way. We could have been the geeky guys, that do the AV equipment in the classroom. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be that guy. I just want to be the cool end. So pretty much ever since then, when I was 13, I've been in broadcasting.
So how did it develop from there?
Well, it was actually, there were a bunch of us got together and we pooled our resources. We mowed lawns and did everything we could to generate money so that we could buy records and equipment and turntables and build a transmitter and buy a car battery that ran the transmitter. And there were about, I would say, 13 or 14 of us that came out of my basement that are all in broadcasting, television, engineers, on-air people, salespeople, management, all out of our basement. And my father, I think, let us do it because he knew where we were and we weren't really getting into trouble. That's what we did.
Tell us a little bit about the history of Hippie Radio.
Well, Hippie Radio was an idea I came up with back when consolidation of radio stations began. There was apparently some research done by someone who decided that nobody was spending any money on oldies radio stations. Advertisers weren't buying it, so they say. And so most of the oldies stations in the United States went off the air. They took them all off. And it was a few companies, CBS in particular, who actually had one of the biggest oldies stations in the country, WCBS FM in New York, actually changed formats.
What year
on
was
all
this?
their stations. I want to say this was around early 2000s, maybe 2005, 2004, somewhere in there. Anyway, so all these oldies stations went off the air. And I was just like, what are they doing? I mean, that's crazy. There's this whole format that just was missing on radio. And so a friend of mine was a researcher, and she had done research for PBS television nationally. And so on Sunday nights, I'm watching these Austin City Limits things and all these cool programs that are on. I'm thinking about baby boomers and how this was a really fast-growing demographic, and there were so many of them, and they were getting ready to head into retirement and had so much money. And I was at a broadcasters event where a professor from, I believe it was Penn State or something, came in, and she was talking about marketing to baby boomers and this demographic and how there were no oldies stations around the U.S. anymore. And so I called this person I knew about research, and I said, so is it the music that's the problem, or is it, in my world, it was the name? Because if you were a baby boomer, number one, you were already a little kind of hip, okay? You weren't your typical older American person. And so when people would say, hey, what's your favorite station? They didn't really want to say, well, oldies is my favorite station. So they kind of had this thing about saying it.
Baby boomers don't want to be old.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And they don't, they were using terms like cool and oldies and fun and all these things. And I thought, as literally as this lady is talking, this professor, I'm like, Hippie Radio. This is a very specific time period that I think people immediately, it can be cooler than oldies.
Yeah.
And so I actually just thought about it, and the person I was sitting next to actually got out of high school, hopped in a van, went all over the country, did the whole hippie thing, went to Woodstock, and I'm starting to tell her about this. She goes, oh my God, I would listen to that all the time. So we did some research and found out that 94% of the people, and this was national research, would listen to a radio station named Hippie, because I was getting a little pushback when I was rolling it out.
Right.
And people were saying, "Oh, that's too liberal for me. We're a pretty conservative town." I'm like, it's not about that. We're just trying to take the fun part out of that era and put it on the radio again.
Right.
And make this like the great WLAC was back in the early 70s, when there was a big top 40 AM station, and WLS in Chicago, and all those kinds of stations. So I just wanted to bring that back because I felt that that's what people grew up with, and I thought it would strike a chord with them, and so far so good.
I'm a fan of your station. I listen to it a lot. I notice that your playlist is larger than a lot of playlists of terrestrial radio. We'll talk about your streaming thing in a minute too. But you also have a big piece of the charm, I think, of your station for me is the local angle. You'll talk about local businesses. You'll bring in people that I know from the community here and speak with them. I'd like for you to say a bit about that local flavor sort of being combined with this sort of nostalgic playlist.
Yeah, one thing that we wanted to do, sort of this live and local thing has really kind of gone away. Mm-hmm. And I actually ran a group of stations for a long time. We had 17 radio stations, and we sort of always went against this big corporate kind of dictate where there's no fun promotions anymore, there's no being out in the community, sort of the ground game. And I still feel that the business is what has changed, not the people. People, I'm kind of a big fan of corny works. I used to make fun of people who did lost dog reports on the air, but now I love it when I hear that, because that's really what we do.
Yeah.
A great example, got an email yesterday. Somebody got married over the weekend here in Nashville. They're honeymooning on the beach in Florida, went through our streaming email media player and emailed us and said, "Hey, I want to surprise her. Could you play the Beatles' Here Comes the Sun? That was our song at our wedding. And here's a guy in Florida." And like, why would we do one thing for two people that aren't here right now and play that for them? But that's kind of what you do.
Because 1,000 people like me would be like, "Oh, that's so sweet."
Exactly. I think if you can touch everybody a little, it matters. And there's sort of two economies here in Nashville. There's the regular economy, and then there's this whole music economy. Yeah. And it's kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
And I ran into a gentleman who created his own show called The Originals, and his name is Even Stevens. And I was introduced to him by BMI, and they said, "I don't know if you know this guy, his name is Even Stevens." I'm like, "Oh, Eddie Rabbitt." Knew right away. Because when I was 13 or 14, I'm playing these Eddie Rabbitt songs, and I look underneath the title, and I see, "Ooh, Even Stevens, that's a cool name."
Yeah.
And we kind of got to know each other, and we play his program on Hippie on Sunday nights. And I said, "Look, here's the thing. Any musicians that are in our world of music, Hippie's world of music, let them know they have a friend here. Anytime they want to come by." These are the people who sort of, in my opinion, made the greatest music in the greatest period of time. So even though I wasn't a hippie and I'm on the tail end of being a baby boomer, I sort of understood that world. And I said, these are people that are artists that have been forgotten, that are ignored, are still writing and making great music, and nobody ever talks to them. Mm-hmm. And if these classic rock stations all over the country, or the oldies stations all over the country, would just pick up the phone, these are wonderful people, and they come in all the time. Just grab a guitar, come on in, we'll talk to you. If you're a local business and you have something going on, come on in, we'll make room. It's not a big pervasive thing, because we're still music focused, mm-hmm. But if it's cool and it's local, we want to do it.
You mentioned earlier the live and local angle, and I would love for you to explain to our listeners how commercial radio stations sort of navigate this. Well, sometimes the programs are pre-recorded and sometimes they're live on the air. And how do you handle that? Like what?
Well, it's amazing when you put on a radio station, everybody wants to do their own show. Hey, I do this really cool show and all we do is instrumental songs. And I do this really cool show and we're focusing on female artists. Or I do this show and we focus on ukuleles. Mm-hmm. They just kind of come out of the woodwork. And you have to be a little careful. So we want to give the ones that we believe our audience have interest in that time. Mm-hmm. And for example, Even Stevens' show, The Originals, he collects original demos of hit songs.
Mhm.
So whether it's Wake Up Little Susie, the husband and wife who wrote that, singing it on the phone, he's got that recording.
I've heard that show. It's great.
Or these just really bizarre things, but our audience finds incredibly interesting. Sunday Night Vinyl is another show we created with Whit Hubner, our afternoon jock. We were kind of talking. It's like, you know what, it'd be great to just play a record, you know. And so the first show we did, you know, we went out. We had to first of all find a turntable. Not easy to do. A little easier now, but when we started it a couple of years ago, you know, we need a USB turntable. And we got to have a good one.
Right.
He did the show and he wanted to host it, and we invited our listeners. Hey, whoever's got a cool album and you want to play it. So we involved them through social media. Bring it in, and you can introduce it. Why did you buy this album? What made you buy it? Was
I
it
did
the first
one of
you ever
those
bought it?
actually. I loved it.
Yeah,
So
because
fun.
we want to hear those stories.
Yeah.
I know what my first album was. You know what your first album was. You know what your first concert was.
Yeah.
And so he plays it, and he does it, and he drops it on, the needle on the turntable, and the song starts playing. I'm like, no. Slow down. You know, I want to hear the needle go on the record. I want to hear. So you'll notice there's a little bit of time, so you can get that feeling for this. Well, what if the record skips? Good.
Right.
It used to skip. We
Right.
want it to skip, if it skips. Not all the time, but if it's a beat-up album, we'll know it. If you took care of your album, we'll know it. If you played it a lot, we'll know it. And that's sort of the charm of that show. So these sort of, they seem kind of out there, but they're really not to someone who appreciates this era of music.
There seems to be a common thread in a lot of what you're saying, whether it's the pops and scratches at the beginning of a record, or it's the dedication to one couple in Florida, or it's the I lost my dog and I'm calling in. It's like a very personal touch. Why do you think that resonates so much right now?
I think it resonates, and I think it will always resonate. And that's why, you know, we'll get that the radio's sort of a dying medium. We're over the top of the bell curve now, and the newspapers are even further along down that bell curve than we are. And, you know, the great thing about radio, and this is why, you know, we're really evolving into an audio industry. You know, we are distributed over any way we can get our hippie out there if we want to. But I think that the charm of it is this relationship. And my best example is, you know, radio was going to die when the reel-to-reel came out, and when the cassette deck came out, and when the 8-track came out, and when the MP3 player came out, and the iPods and iPads, and you know, and on your mobile device. And, you know, we're still here. And the reason we are, and I believe the reason Hippie is creating this connection with people that's different than most stations, because most stations aren't as passionate about it like they used to be, is because of that human connectedness. And my example is, let's say you even have 2,500 tunes on your iPod, your MP3 player, or whatever, somewhere on your mobile device, wherever you have these songs. Over time, you know what they are. You can put them on shuffle. You can whatever. It's just like, you know, they always come back. And why do they come back? And I believe the reason that people come back to the radio is because you don't always want to pick your own songs.
Right.
In this world where we can pick and choose whatever we want, wherever we want, you know, I want somebody else to pick them. And I'll sit through a bad song that I may not really love to get to a good one, or to play a game, a contest that I didn't really expect, or to hear something I wasn't ready for. And it's because of the human element. I still believe there's a connection with radio and America's front porch, and I say that a lot. And those days where they just sit on the front porch on a really cool Nashville evening and listen to the radio.
Yeah.
So while it's great to program your own stuff, whether it's Pandora or any other streaming service, you know, there's still a charm about having another human being on the other end, a real human being.
Well, and in this case, you are the real human being, right? Or you're the person who makes a lot of the programming choices, or the only guy who makes the programming choices.
Yeah, for now I handed it off a few times and they've messed it up a little, so I take it back. So I have what I call an intervention. That's cool, but no, we're not doing that.
Right. So how do you choose the songs that are going to be on your playlist?
Well, you know, it's not rocket science. And I'll be happy to give away my secret, because most researchers and programmers are there like, what are you doing? I get a lot of my data from how records did. Let's say a song like Convoy, which was a novelty record that C.W. McCall did whatever year it was, or any other novelty record, ask Ray Stevens down the street, to the greatest rock and roll songs ever done, like, you know, Dream On or Sweet Emotion or Can't Get No Satisfaction. You know, a lot of times we're all on the charts at the same time. Whether it was this goofy, what they would say, bubblegum, 1910 Fruit Gun Company or Tony Orlando and Dawn, hey, you know what? Deep Purple was on the charts at the same time, and so are these songs. And these so-called industry experts would come along and say, you can't do that stuff. It doesn't make sense. And that's exactly why we're doing it. Those sold millions and millions and millions and millions of copies.
Right.
Just because they're goofy songs doesn't mean nobody ever wants to ever hear them ever again. So what typically happens is researchers come in, they research and say, hey, and I'll give you a great example. There was a format out called Jammin'. It was in the 80s, early 90s. Some research companies said, hey, you know what? Nobody ever plays Brick House anymore by the Commodores, and they don't play, Al Green and these great soulful tunes. So they find out that these test really, really well. Well, the reason they test well is because people can't find them anywhere and they want to hear them. Mm-hmm. So what they would do is they'd play them every day and a half. So they build this format called Jammin'. They play the songs that tested well. They'll burn the crap out of them, and then the format lives and then it dies in a year or two. Because the very thing that made them special,
the inaccessibility,
they played it way too much and way too
Right.
often, and people got sick of it. So we have several different rotations and philosophies we use here. But if it sold well, and let's say it has 17 million views on YouTube, I'll look at that. If I see how many people stream it, I can get a sense of what is working and what people want to hear
Right.
more often. And a lot of the ones are the same. I can just tell you right now, Hotel California, Dream On, Sweet Emotion, Sweet Home Alabama. I mean, these songs, no matter how many tests you do, they are always in the top 10.
Right.
And you can't play them too much because people love them. And there are other ones, the weird ones, that I have in what I call a lunar rotation.
Like Green
That we
Tambourine.
play very rarely, but we play it. And you'd be like, what? Where? Why did I hear Stairway to Heaven and now I'm hearing Folsom Prison by
Right.
Johnny Cash? Because it just works. I don't know the reason, but it's a human reason.
I'm interested in the way that you look at data, and I'm interested in what you think about modern sort of contemporary commercial radio stations' use of data analytics, specifically, calling somebody up and playing them 10 seconds of the new, whatever pop single, and asking the person to make a determination very quickly, thumbs up, thumbs down,
Yeah.
What do you think of analytics?
I think anywhere you can get data, you should get it. But I think where it gets, I don't think there's anything wrong with the data. I think it's how it's applied. And I think you can make everything really homogenized. And so when I hear radio, and Nashville, in my opinion, used to be a wonderful, great radio market. But then and it wasn't just Nashville, it's all over. They just became sweeper song, sweeper song, sweeper song. It was just a jukebox.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people want. And with the new people meter and how they measure ratings, and it used to be a diary method, now it's people meter. You tend to play for what works to your strengths, so it generates revenue. I'm sort of radio is a product-driven business. If the product is good, the revenue will come.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of have to trust that. And we don't have the resources to do tons of research. It's very expensive. But I think research now is getting much less expensive. It's all over. How much data do you want?
Mm-hmm.
I can make anything look good. That doesn't mean we should create a format around it.
Right.
So there are very high cum, low TSL formats. High cum is just numbers of bodies, and low time spent listening formats. And then there's the other way around. So it just depends on who you're trying to reach.
I want to talk to you a little bit about streaming. I will admit that when I'm in my car, I will listen to your radio station, on the terrestrial band. But in my house, I don't get a good signal, so I
Right.
stream it over your app.
Well, we appreciate that because we're not the biggest station here.
Right, and so I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your attitude is towards your streaming listeners versus your terrestrial listeners, and where you sort of apply your energy in terms of, do you want to grow your terrestrial signal? Is that a priority for you, or are you mostly focused on the online thing?
Well,
or
for
both,
me, there's one product. We simulcast exactly what's on the air on our stream. That doesn't mean we can't have ancillary products. I've also run some other stations that have my players, so you can create your own station. You can have your jocks with it. You don't have to have jocks. You can create, I only want to hear, Led Zeppelin today or Billy Joel today or whatever. You can customize it any way you want. So there's that option. We don't offer that yet, but I think we're going to get to that point where people can sort of pick and choose. And really it's just a product of us not being large. There's great things about being a small station in a big market, and there's some downsides. One of the downsides of being small in a big market is we have huge amount of online listening, which is great, but it's very expensive to stream. So, and we can kind of get into that whole thing that's going on with songwriters now. So, the reality is we can kind of, as broadcasters, we get lumped in with the streaming providers or the people that stream music, but it's a completely different thing. And there's just not a lot of money there. And so it's very expensive to put on for us with royalties and streaming and hosting and all of that. So we try to supplement that by getting sponsors if we can, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, I hope that you can.
So songwriters aren't the only ones not making money on streams, is what I'm saying.
Well, yes, let's go there. Actually,
So-
I wonder what your take is on the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act.
Well,
which maybe you should explain what that
Well,
is.
we have different. We're on the radio. We call it a performance tax. Our side. Everybody else says, "Hey, wait a minute, this is our material. We don't." But the gentleman, and I apologize because I don't remember his name, but it was actually at Belmont last week at this panel. They had the Judiciary Committee in. Belmont's not a cuss word yet, is it? Okay.
No, we're going there.
Okay. So they got everybody in the room, and it was more for show, I think, than anything like those typically are when people from Washington come out here. Because really, inside the Beltway, it's a whole other planet. But we want to make sure that radio broadcasting is not lumped in with everything else, okay? And the reason is this. The guy who wrote All About That Bass was one of the first people to speak. Great guys from here. And I almost went up and hugged him afterwards because radio we kind of get thrown in with Pandora and Spotify and all these streamers. It's like, wait a minute. And he says, look, my song played 150 million times online and I got $5,000 or whatever. Completely agree. Not right. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to keep coming to radio to get the dough. Because if we keep killing each other, nobody's going to win and we're all going to be in trouble. We pay a lot of money we're used to paying songwriters in particular, okay? Hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and they should get that because songwriters cannot fill venues. They're in the shadows, nobody knows who they are. The performers, that's where I kind of draw the line. That's different, okay? I think at the committee hearings that were online in DC, someone said, well, and I don't want to call out this group by name, but a very, very successful country act. And they said, well, they only made $1,500 for online streams. And I, on the other side, am going, oh, poor group. They only made $143 million last year. So we just have to keep it in perspective. I'm a big proponent of paying the creators of the music. I always have been, always will be. And being in Nashville, I feel even more strongly because of that. They were the ones sitting on a beach or in a car or whatever, and it came to their, it's their property, in my opinion. When you sign that over to a label or to somebody else, I can't help that. We write the checks. What the PROs do with them, I don't know how that's getting distributed. All I know is I write a lot of money to those 3 buildings across my street, a lot every month, which isn't easy to do when you're a small business like everyone else.
Right.
So
you're talking about BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC.
Yeah. Right. So I think it's just a matter of working it out. We need to work it out. I just want songwriters in particular to know that, broadcasting isn't making a lot of money on stream either. We're not. And I'd be happy to show anyone. So now the people performing those acts, my opinion, you made your dough. You filled those concert venues. You sold all that bling. You got to do all that stuff. And if you didn't do a good job keeping track of your dough when you were hot, because we all go through hot streaks, don't come asking for it now. So that's the side that sort of I'm on, and it's a different side, and I get that. But I am a true believer of we just need to work it out. We just do.
Right.
And I think we will. I just want to make sure the songwriters are on the right side of the table. I think they should come over toward the guys who've been paying him all this time. Because
Right.
this guy who wrote It's All About That Bass said one thing. All I know is when my song plays on the radio, I make money. When it plays online, I don't make anything.
Mhm.
And I about hugged him because that's the truth. So I just think they're looking at the wrong people to pay their bills.
That's interesting, and I like what you say about these sort of alliances and disagreements that are happening now between people who historically have been friendly towards each other,
Yeah.
in the business. For example, I respectfully disagree with your stance on the performing rights
Mhm.
payments, as many musicians
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
I want to ask you too,
But that doesn't mean we can't do something.
right, no, absolutely.
Because that's kind of where I am. I think
Yeah.
there are many people on my side and probably your side. Look, it's all or nothing. And there's guys on my side who say,
Right.
don't pay him a penny. I'm
Right.
like, wait a minute, let's just cooler heads will prevail and something will work out, but it's not just our business.
That's true.
There's copyright issues all over this country right now
Right.
and intellectual property issues and all of those things. So I just want, in particular, songwriters and performers to know we're not the enemy here.
Right.
We're not. And people still discover their music over the radio no matter what anybody says.
I think that's fantastic. So what do you say to somebody like me or other people in bands who didn't write the songs, who get radio airplay, and they have a hit on the radio, and I might say to you, well, the United States is one of the only developed countries in the world that doesn't pay royalties. And I know there are historical reasons for this, and so how do you
Yeah.
explain this?
Well, this goes way back to whoever started this in the first place. I don't think it was Marconi, but I don't know if he was playing tunes. But our side of it would be all the exposure, all the mentions. I think a label. There was an ad in the paper we took out the day that came to Nashville
Mm-hmm.
that the National Association of Broadcasters took out. That a Sony exec or somebody said that without radio, this country act is nothing. It's a nobody. So, what we do has extreme value too.
Mhm.
And that's all it is. You believe what you do has a lot of value. And so do we.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can put dollars and cents to that. We can say, look, if we charged advertising for this is what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of stations have given up that. They don't want to pay those royalties anymore, so they go to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, an FM or an AM band of just talk would be kind of boring, I think. So
Yeah.
so that's what I mean about there has to be, if we
I
don't
agree.
work something out, we're both going to be in trouble.
I couldn't agree more.
So, and there's just a lot of posturing going on. I don't know how long that typically takes. I'm not a Washington guy, but it was an odd meeting last week because a lot of us like each other.
That's
we just
what
gotta
I mean.
figure it
yeah, right.
And I really don't have the solution. But I think being willing to at least discuss it is the first thing to do. And I don't think the government ought to be involved at all. I think we ought to get the principals involved and say, part of it is, and I completely agree with BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC. It's like, from their point of view, is like, how do you I can't work out a deal with 1,500 separate artists
Yes.
and 1,500 separate songwriters
No, you
for the
can't.
1,500 titles I play.
Right.
It would be crazy. And
It's
then everybody would be
impossible.
like, well, hey, I played this on that tune. Why aren't you paying me? And why? So I don't think anybody really wants to open up that Pandora's box.
Right.
But I think there's got to be a way that's easy for the artists and songwriters to receive funds without building brand new skyscrapers in town,
Mm-hmm.
personally.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of their dough is going to that. And that's not our deal. We write the checks.
Right. Another person I spoke to said that he always says to musicians who say, "Oh, I'm not receiving my royalty payments from streaming services or whoever." Well, who is standing in between you and the radio stations, or you and your PR? Take a look at that.
You have your opinions and I have mine, but I want, particularly songwriters, but others as well, to know, we're your friend, and we shouldn't let anybody come between what we've done
Right.
and what has been successful for years and years and
Right.
years. And I think that's partly where we're coming from. It's like, wait
Yeah.
a minute, why now? Is it because there's more attorneys in the world? I mean, what is going on? And if there hasn't been fair compensation ever, let's get to the root of what that was. Were there some bad deals with labels? Sure. That doesn't mean it should be the precedent.
Right. Well, I think that what's going on is that record sales are in a downward spiral. So musicians and labels and everybody is
Well,
looking for other.
And some independent labels talked, and I
Yeah.
feel for those guys too.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, they're taking a risk. I get it. We're doing the same thing. We're a
Yeah.
small business too. So I just don't know where it's going to fall.
Yeah.
I think primarily it's all about the streaming thing. The business model got messed up. I don't know if we need to thank Steve Jobs for that, or that nobody's printing vinyl anymore, but nobody's making money anymore,
Right.
and everybody wants some.
Yes. Yeah.
So if we can kind of get out of the I got screwed, you owe me
Yeah.
part to what I bring to the table, meaning performer or writer or
Mhm.
radio,
Mm-hmm.
is valuable and important. Let's keep the government out of the room and work it out if we can. And if they can help us with a framework, great, but it's worked pretty well for 70, 80, 90 years until this whole digital thing came.
Right.
And I would say that performers and songwriters have a friend in radio when it comes to streaming, because we're not making anything either. So while streaming and the internet and all this new shiny stuff is great and all this, it's such revenue growth and there's so much money in it. Yeah, well, Facebook isn't making money. Pandora's never made money. SiriusXM's never made money. You know, this is all publicly traded dollars we're talking about here. So, you know, just because it's growing doesn't mean it's effective. Is it working? Is it driving people to my storefront where I sell earrings or I sell lampshades?
Right.
That's what I want to know.
Right.
Can I get customers to your store?
Right.
So maybe you and I should just work it out.
I think we could do it. I really. No. I would love to hear more about. You said something interesting earlier about how terrestrial license fees are less expensive for you than streaming, and could you say a little bit more about that and explain how that works
Well,
out?
they're not less. Well, I guess it's a percentage
Mm-hmm.
of our revenue.
Mm-hmm.
It was that way for a long time, and then in the 90s and early 2000s, we got away from that. It was kind of a flat fee, and the smaller stations were getting killed. And
Yeah,
so,
can you
wait a
explain that
minute,
for our learners?
You know, can we just have this be a percentage? If we do well, you do well. That's all we ask. And it did go back to that, thank goodness. So I think that's helped a lot. Now, if we can just get our arms around this digital piece, because this group, the Copyright Royalty Board, are setting rates. And I don't know whether they're just throwing darts against the wall or what, but in comparison to the overall terrestrial, it's a lot more expensive for a lot less result. And by that I mean, let's say at Hippie last month we had 39,000 people listening online to our station. Okay, it cost me more to do that than it did to play it over the air. Now, when that's one-to-one, relatively accurate measurement, okay, but over the air, and I think what the gentleman who wrote It's All About That Bass was pointing out too, when the song gets played over the radio, it gets exposure, and then people have to go buy it somewhere. So that's how he can make his money,
Mm-hmm.
okay? On top of us paying him for the right to play his song on our station,
Mm-hmm.
which we do. So it's point to multi-point. When I'm listening to a stream, I'm pretty much getting one person is hearing this song, an impression they call it, I think, in Sound Exchange. When it gets played over the radio, it could be 1 to 10,000 people could be listening, and probably are,
Mm-hmm.
and that might want to go get that record. Hey, I want to go buy that song. That's good. I don't think anybody's been able to figure out how to monetize this other way of doing it.
Right.
You know, because there's just nothing to charge them for.
Right. Right. Well, the name of the class that you're speaking to actually is called
By
Understanding
charging them
the-
for, I mean like a physical piece of vinyl or a cassette tape or
Yes.
something. I don't mean that it's not valuable.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I understood. Yes. This course is called Understanding the Music Business, What is Music Worth? And so a question that I've been asking everybody I speak to, and a lot of our conversation has actually been about how value is assigned anyway, but I wanted to ask you in the same way that I asked the other interviewees, what do you think about the way that or do you have any overarching viewpoints about the way that value is being assigned to music right now?
You know, I wish I knew more about a lot of that. I don't. I understand the point of views of folks. Look, this is mine. I'm not getting compensated for it. You know, and the label was, and then on the other side, it's, well, people are calling us all the time asking, will you play this? Will you play? Well, which is it? I'm damned if I do. I'm damned if I don't. You know, and I'm not in the weeds that much about that, and I almost prefer not to because it doesn't look pretty. I think there are lots of principles involved in the government, and from the performer standpoint, and from the songwriter standpoint, and from the streaming provider standpoint. And I'd rather, you know, I'm just a small guy trying to do his best. I'm not out to screw anybody. We're just trying to, you know, we're just a small business like the ones we call on every day.
Yeah.
Now that's, you know, corporately, that's different. The bigger giant groups, who are also not making any money probably. Well, they might be making money, but they paid way too much for the radio stations. I think this is all going to kind of settle out one day, and I would be very happy if there were a lot more independent owners that can work with independent musicians, independent songwriters, and let's just get back to the ground and figure out, instead of letting the 2 or 3 corporate folks dictate everything in the world that goes on, that we have to live with, and we do. It's part of the deal, I get it, but it doesn't make it right.
Another question that I'm asking everybody that I speak to is one that I think that you're invested in already because of everything that you've said about your business, but what is your attitude about what, on a local level, you know, our learners are going to be from all over the world, and so one of the things that I ask everybody is, what can people do in their local communities everywhere to support good music, you know, good a creative
come to
community.
Nashville.
No.
Enough people have done it. Gosh, you know, people are just so vastly different, and parts of the country are so vastly different. Some places music pockets are great, other places it's like, and I think that's what makes it hard for some labels sometimes to find these, you know, where did this person come from? They all didn't come from, you know, nationally televised talent shows.
True.
You know, that's not the reality of what it is, and you could probably do a whole show on that.
Don't get me started on that. Yeah.
And these sort of forgotten folks, and you know, that is the challenge, and I think that's one of the reasons I love being in radio is because folks like you have a group, would probably love to be on the radio, I would hope, and so we can bring that and bring people out of obscurity to having other people appreciate their music, and it can come from anywhere. So again, I don't have a really good answer for that, other than, you know, Nashville is, and I've only been coming here for 3.5 years, is just so different than anywhere else. I mean, where else can you have on the same night there were like 3 giant shows all going on at once, and they were all full.
Yeah.
Most place where I come from, if you got a show like a Don Henley or somebody, it'd be once a year maybe.
Yeah, and when I was growing up, you'd have to drive an hour and a half to get there.
So, but, and you know, now it's the era of cover bands too. So, but I think that's a good thing, quite honestly, because it keeps what I believe is the greatest period of music alive.
Yeah.
So I think, and you're in one.
Yeah, I am. I'm in a couple.
I gotta tell you, I mean, there's an audience for everything. I believe any radio station, any band, any musician, any songwriter has reach. And in radio, we call it reach. We reach a certain type or group of people in a certain type or area, and that has value. And the challenge is to figure out how to make that, how to monetize that.
Yeah.
Is there a way I can make it worth my trip to drive 200 miles to pick up $50? It cost me more to drive there to play than it did to play, but that's my investment for my group that I'm in or whatever. So I certainly see it, and it's helped me understand that a lot more being here, because, you know, I think we need to listen a little more to.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm finding, and I wonder what your take is on this, is that people who bet on emotional resonance, or a personal touch, or something that is not seem sort of prepackaged and mediated, wins a lot in this environment, at least on a independent level.
Yeah, they're just so dramatically different. It's as different as you being at hippie radio versus a bigger corporate station, which is next door.
Right.
But the environment is completely different. And I think it's the same with these artists, no matter whether it's a venue you play at or the type of people that you're exposed to. But most of the songwriters I've talked to, and I haven't talked to a bazillion of them, but the ones I have talked to, they just know when they know. That's kind of how I was with hippie. I just knew that I thought this would do well because it was missing. It was absent. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing anything new. I'm doing radio the way we used to do it. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm doing it the way we used to do it is because I don't believe people in the humanness of them have changed.
Yeah.
The business world around them has, and the world has changed, but people are the same. And I think it's the same when you're writing a song or you're performing a song. They're the same. The artist gets sick of playing, I'm sure the last thing the Eagles want to do is play Hotel California one of these nights and take it easy again. But the people that are there, that paid good money to see him, that's what they want to see. So, and a great example was I was just at Chicago on Earth, Wind & Fire at the Ascend Theater. It was like 2 or 3 days after it opened, which is an awesome venue, by the way. Like, we need another venue in Nashville, but I'm glad we do. It's awesome.
It is awesome.
And they came out together and played some songs together, Chicago and Earth, Wind & Fire. And then Earth, Wind & Fire was on. They played a couple of their hits. And then they kind of played 4 or 5 in a row that were just their new ones and things they want to try. And people went to the bathroom, they went to get something to eat. And then, Shining Star comes back on. Yeah. They're all back in there.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of the way it is. And so the artist is going, well, wait a minute, if I don't at least play some new stuff, how are they ever going to like the new one?
Right.
And I don't want to keep regurgitating this song that I can play my sleep over and over again. But,
right.
So you just have to understand why they're there.
Yeah.
And I think artists get that. They know. And they know what works.
Yeah.
I'm going to open with this, I'm going to close with this, works every time.
We have to do this one, yeah.
Because if you don't, I'm going to get yelled at.
Yeah.
It's just, and that's the way we are. Yeah. We have a request line. We have a place where people can, text us their request, but they're requesting the same ones. I mean, they
want to hear
hey, can I hear Take It Easy? Can I hear Hotel California? Oh, there's a surprise.
Right.
I just played it 2 days ago and I got to play it again. Okay,
Right.
And that's okay. There are just those iconic tunes that have that impact. Not everybody can write Happy Birthday.
I want to ask you another question that you may not want to answer, and if you don't, we don't have to include it. But part of the mythology, at least in my mind and the mind of a lot of music fans that I know, of radio in the heyday of, say the 1970s and the rock and roll era, has to do, number one, some of the things that we've already talked about with the personalities of the DJs, before that maybe the pirate radio stations that came out. There was this sort of freewheeling thing that also involved scandals every now and then with payola.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder if you could say a word about payola and the way that it exists in the modern era.
Aren't those the guys trying to make money off of us now that want more money from us that used to pay us to play their stuff?
I don't know, you tell
Under
me.
the table?
Yeah, you tell me.
That was a weird time. I knew of a few guys that I found out subsequently later that were getting that. But I mean, back in the day, when this, music was out, I think people were getting cars and God knows what was happening. And it was all guys, there was it was this incestuous, close relationship. And, I think it's probably a miracle some of these artists were successful at all. If you didn't happen to be with this certain guy that had this certain connection, that had this PD, that was on the take, that would play your tunes. Do I think that's real? I think it absolutely happened. I don't think it hasn't been the case in a really long time. I mean, we sign our Plagola and Payola forms and we make sure our folks don't do any of that, but there's just, it's easier now because there's not a lot of dough to go around in this business like there used to be. But I think there's a lot of cool things that are happening. I'm going to get off the topic of payola and Plagola, so I shouldn't talk about that. But I know that, my opinions are not maybe reflective of the National Association of Broadcasters, so I'm going to at least state that up front. But
Okay.
but I am on their board. But that whole sort of scandalous, freewheeling time, there was a lot of charm about that time, and then there was bad things. I mean, there were probably a lot of artists that got screwed during that because, Bob Seger's label had the inside track on this, or so God knows what infighting went on that we don't even know about, but I'm sure there was. The haves and have-nots. So it's so weird because, I was just this guy, wanted to be a disc jockey when he was 13 and was on the air until I was 30 in a 10 by 10 room just singing along. That's all I did, and talk to people. And now, it's just this big complex industry, and labels are moving overseas, and the PROs aren't treating us fair, and the radio stations aren't giving us enough dough, and the streaming providers are making out like bandits on our creative products. It's just so big and complicated.
Right. Do you think it's a more fair or level playing field now than it was in the sort of swinging days?
Not for little guys.
Yeah.
I think it's tough on startup musicians, startup songwriters, and startup radio stations. Because I gotta tell you, there aren't a lot of me left.
I know.
Which I think is a shame, and especially in bigger markets. When I was looking at stations to buy, I always wanted to own my own station.
Yeah.
Until the 90s, when people were paying 25 times cash flow, they were paying outrageous amounts, and that's why, Cumulus, everybody's read about them being in trouble, and I don't know how iHeart's going to do with all of this. And there's some just people went crazy in typical consolidation, and I didn't want to own a station then. But then when things started getting back to reality, they're like, why would you want to go into a market where there's Clear Channel, Cumulus, or iHeart, South Central, and all these big broadcasters? And I'm like, because I think that now's the perfect time to do it. Nobody's doing what I'm doing. And until we get back to doing what I'm doing, and that's working with the mom and pops businesses that are trying to get their name out and get people in their store, radio will be much better off when we get back to that, my personal opinion.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm a fan of what you do, and I appreciate your time today. We've been speaking with Tony Richards, who is the owner and founder of Hippie Radio 94.5 FM in Nashville, also available online.
Absolutely, on your mobile device, on your iPads, any other potential, and so we appreciate you coming by.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was
really
fun.
Enjoyed it.